and welcome again to a new season of the Philly Factor here on LaSalle TV. My name is Paul Perrello. I'm your host, and I am so glad to be with you once again as we get this new season started. I'm particularly happy to have my next guest join us here on the program because he has written a book, and we're going to talk about that book and a second book that he's also working on. And it's about a great Philadelphian. And before I even begin with that, there are many people in Philadelphia, in the region, in the country, and across the world that get all the recognition that they rightfully deserve. And then there are those people who deserve that recognition and then fall under the radar screen and no one really pays attention to them. But I am happy to say that finally in Philadelphia, an icon in the music industry and the civil rights movement is finally getting her just desserts. That individual is Marian Anderson. My guest has written one book on Marian Anderson and will soon have a second book out. Emile Joe Henwood joins us here on the program. Joe has quite a laundry list of exceptional experience and credentials. Two-time national schoolboy rowing championship in a single scull, four-time member of the United States national rowing teams, winning 2 gold and 2 silver medals in international competition. He also served in the military, U.S. military naval aviator, lieutenant pilot in command of multi-engine aircraft, FAA commercial pilot's license with single multi-engine and instrument ratings. The list goes on and on. And I first want to welcome Joe to the program. And thank you, Joe, for your service to our great country, and also commend you once again on this great book that you have written, Remembering a Great American Hero, Marian Anderson. And Joe, thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having me, Paul. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Yeah, we talked earlier this year during the summer in a radio interview about Marian Anderson, and you have made it your life's mission to really capture the essence of Marian Anderson, a great icon in the music industry, in the civil rights movement. And there are some unusual or usual connections between you and Marian Anderson going back to your childhood because your grandmother didn't live too far from where Marian Anderson lived in South Philadelphia.
Yeah, I think someone pointed at church. I have a good friend who is very spiritual and thinks about these types of things. And he said that he believed that the Marian Anderson seeds were planted in my family back in the early 1890s when my grandmother was a youngster living on Webster Street in South Philly. And in 1897, at 1833 Webster Street, less than 4 blocks away from where my grandmother lived, Marian Anderson was born.
Wow.
And you being a South Philly guy, you know how the South Philly neighborhoods are. Everybody knows everybody else and
Sure.
talks to everybody. Yeah.
Yeah.
So those seeds were planted. I'm firmly convinced now those seeds were planted in the Henwood family back in the 1890s, and they've been getting watered ever since, but in a lot of different ways.
Yeah. Now, you're a Southwest Philly guy.
Yeah.
And so, okay, given the connection with your grandmother and Marian Anderson, there are so many books that you could have written, Joe. I mean, given your rowing credentials, given your time in the military, what made you decide that Marian Anderson is the topic that you want to explore?
Paul, as a kid, but when I was about 9 or 10 years old, back in the middle '50s, being the oldest of 9 in my family, I was able to walk up the street to 1840 South 65th Street to my grandparents. And just about every time I went in there, they were playing records. They were big classical music fans. And being from South Philly, and that being the time when Marian Anderson was at her peak in the mid '50s, they were listening to a lot of Marian Anderson records. And I think that was how the seeds were further watered.
Mm-hmm.
And I decided for some reason I decided in 2018 to I wanted to attend the Marian Anderson Awards event down at the Kimmel Center. And in doing that, I decided to look up Marian Anderson on the internet because I really didn't know that much about her, like most people.
Right.
So I'm reading all this on the internet. Meanwhile, I had a friend who wanted to. He asked me if I would write a pamphlet on about Marian Anderson so he could pass it out to his philanthropic friends and raise money for the Marian Anderson Museum. And so, make a long story short, I went to the museum and in my investigation, and Paul, I was blown away from the time I first walked in with all the candid pictures of Marian Anderson with every famous person you could think of from the 20th century, everybody. And they all wanted to be around her. She wasn't trying to be around them. They were always seeking Marian Anderson. I'm talking about presidents of the United States. I'm talking about Jackie Robinson. I'm talking about major celebrities, A-list celebrities. And there were dozens of these pictures. They're on display at the museum at 762 South Martin Street in South Philly. I'd encourage people to go there. And I left there, Paul, being a native Philadelphian, saying to myself, how come I'm this old and I didn't know that much about her? I was embarrassed.
Mm.
So I decided I'm trying to cover up my embarrassment by overdoing it and writing a few books about her.
Yeah,
She's a story that needs to be told. Needs to be
absolutely.
told.
Yeah, your first book is out, Remembering a Great American Hero, Marian Anderson. You're working on a second book, and as I said at the beginning, there are those people that get all the recognition that they rightfully deserve, and then there are those people that fly under the radar screen. And for the longest time, everybody knew Marian Anderson for that concert that was done many decades ago on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial in Washington. And
Right.
so, as soon as you hear the name Marian Anderson, I think most people go to that image of her singing on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. And I'm happy to say that now Philadelphia finally has given her due credit because they have named the concert hall at the Kimmel Center, Marian Anderson Hall. She's finally getting a statue out on South Broad Street. And so the recognition, finally, the recognition that she deserves, maybe she has gotten that recognition across the country or worldwide, but she's finally getting the recognition that she deserves here in her hometown.
Yeah. Well, I think part of the problem is, Paul, that she was never a publicity hound. She
Hmm.
was a worldwide celebrity. Everybody knew her. She was at the top of the game. The media was always after her for interviews and trying to find whatever else they could out about her. But she judiciously protected her own privacy and the privacy of her family from the media. And she was an extremely humble person. And humble humility is the virtue of all virtues. And I believe that Marian Anderson, one of the reasons I'm driving this thing is because I believe that Marian Anderson, having investigated her life and found out that her 96 years on this earth were perfect.
Mm.
And I think she's a saint. And you and I were raised Catholic, and the Catholics all think they have a corner on the market when it comes to designating saints. But you know what? You don't have to be a Catholic to be a saint. And
Right.
Marian Anderson was a cradle to grave Baptist, and she was a very devout, spiritual person. And she had a special devotion, by the way, of all people, to the Blessed Virgin Mary, the mother of
Mm.
Jesus. And she constantly was going wherever she went in the world. She'd find a Catholic church, and I have pictures of her kneeling at the altar of the Blessed Virgin Mary with a veil on her head, praying
Wow. Mm.
wherever she went. She had a very special devotion, more so than most anybody else I ever knew.
Yeah. The whole image of Marian Anderson on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial is a story unto itself. I mean, you probably could write a book about how that came about because she was black and because we were living in a time where blacks were not able to perform in major concert halls in the United States. Um, Eleanor Roosevelt actually intervened in her on her behalf and allowed for her to have this concert on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, right?
Exactly. And when Eleanor intervened, she was a member of the Daughters of the American Revolution who owned Constitution Hall. And she was so upset over this, she resigned in protest from the Daughters of the American Revolution. And there were a few thousand other members who followed suit. And to this day, unfortunately, the Daughters of the American Revolution is still suffering from that stigma, even though they have redeemed themselves and they have opened up Constitution Hall, and they're no longer acting the way they did back then. And on top of all that, they gave a sizable donation to the Marian Anderson Museum, which is in her home in South Philly.
Hmm.
They gave $150,000
Wow.
in the summer of 2004 for the renovation of the building.
Mm.
And so I think they've redeemed themselves, and that's all water over the dam. And Marian Anderson herself, even though that was a seminal concert of her entire career, she never wanted to talk about it. She thought it was just the dark days back then, and it's in the rearview mirror, and she's not looking in the rearview mirror. She kept going forward, and she was very fortunate because it was divine providence, in my estimation, and a lot of others, that caused her to be able to be on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. If she was put inside the Constitution Hall, which was the largest hall and still is to this day in Washington, only 4,000 people would have heard her sing. And it would
Mm.
have just been one more Marian Anderson sold out concert. But because she was out on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial with over 75,000 people and millions listening on the radio. Oh, and by the way, in her neighborhood in South Philly, when she was on the radio in 1939 for that concert, all the people in the neighborhood turned up the volume on their radios and opened their doors, and you could hear her throughout all that section of South Philly. It was
Wow.
amazing. That would
Yeah.
never have happened. And I just say thank God for the Daughters of the American Revolution.
Yeah, for
They made
sure.
it happen.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. The other thing is that we think of her as a music icon because that's what we pretty much know about her. But she was really at the forefront, even before there was a quote unquote civil rights movement in the United States. She was really at the forefront, breaking barriers, if you will, whether intentionally or unintentionally. But again, not necessarily a name that you would put with the civil rights movement in the United States. You would never put Marian Anderson in that category because we only pretty much know her because of her work in the music industry. But she really was at the forefront of the civil rights movement.
That's absolutely correct. And the reason we don't think of her that way is because she was never an activist. She was never militant. She only ever sang, and she did it all with the beauty of her God given voice.
Mm.
And that changed the world. That changed the world, and it changed the course of history. Actually, when you think about it, Paul, 1939 was what, 25 years before the Civil Rights Act was passed in 1964?
That's right.
And she led the civil rights movement. The modern civil rights era was started by Marian Anderson on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. No, and all the history books say that now. They all
Wow.
say that. Yeah.
That is truly remarkable. Um, you mentioned earlier in the interview that everybody wanted to be around Marian Anderson, and when we had talked before in another interview that we did, you mentioned that every living president up to George Bush, the father, had invited Marian Anderson to the White House. They all wanted Marian Anderson in their company. And that's pretty remarkable because every once in a while you would see, that somebody gets invited to the White House or they have the Kennedy honors and they would get singled out and brought out and commended for their
Mm-hmm.
work. But to be a girl from South Philly, this iconic music superstar, and we didn't necessarily use the word superstar back in the day, 1939, if you will, but every American president invited her, and she went to the White House.
Absolutely. And in fact, right after the 1939 concert, which was on Easter Sunday, April 9th, 1939, in June of that year, the English King George VI and Queen Elizabeth came to Washington. They came to the United States for the first time ever. They stepped the royalty came from England to step on American soil since even before the Revolution.
Sure.
And of course, they were looking for support for the World War II at the time. And so President and Mrs. Roosevelt had a big state dinner, and they invited Marian Anderson to sing for them. And she sang Ave Maria.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
she sang Ave Maria, and she knocked it out of the park, Paul. Knocked
Yeah,
it out of the park.
for sure. When you started this undertaking of the life of Marian Anderson, what sticks out? And I know there are many things that stick out for you in writing the book, but is there one or two things that those aha moments, I like to refer to them, that as you're doing your research, you're like, wow, I never would have imagined Marian Anderson was associated with or worked with or did this. I mean, there had to be many moments, but one or two that you could share with us.
Well, one of the things that I found out about Marian Anderson was because she was a fearless Christian lady and so humble, she feared nothing. She had
Mm.
no fear whatsoever. And she left the United States to go to Europe and especially Germany and Austria to hone her skills. Right in the early 30s, mid 30s, when Hitler was just coming into being. And at that point, a lot of the black musicians who had been over there for a number of years came back to the United States because it got to be too dangerous for them because Hitler was all about promoting the Aryan race. And if you weren't Aryan, meaning if you were a Jew or a black, you were in trouble.
Mm.
And so it became very dangerous for the black performers from the United States to be in that part of the world. She stayed. She did not come home. She stayed there by herself. And in 1935, she was invited by the Archbishop of Salisbury, Austria, to come to the Salisbury Music Festival and Salzburg. I'm sorry. And they wouldn't let her come. The music organizers wouldn't let her come, but the Archbishop, who was sort of in charge of the classical concerts at that time, invited her, and she came. And she was told uh, she was noted for singing Negro spirituals, which were actually prayers
Hmm.
to the Lord at the end of all of her concerts. And they told her, and they were trying to stamp out Jews, blacks, and religion. So she had two of the check marks marked black and religious. And
Yeah.
they said, if you sing your spiritual, we're going to put you in jail.
Wow.
They threatened to jail her, and she came there, and guess what she did? She sang her spirituals,
Yeah.
and she was too big to jail. And at that, right after she sang that concert in Salzburg, Austria, Arturo Toscanini, who was the leading music personality of the day, a conductor from Italian conductor and composer, came up to her in front of all the other leading musicians in the whole world and said, "What I heard today, one is only privileged to hear once in 100 years."
Wow.
And that put her on the map.
Hmm.
That really, really did put her on the map.
Wow.
And so she was outstanding that way. She was a very, very brave person. The other thing I noticed about her bravery was when she was, I think, 21 in 1919. She traveled alone from Philadelphia on the train to Chicago during the Red Summer in Chicago when the most horrible race riots were taking place and they were killing blacks wholesale
Mm.
in Chicago during that time. She went there for a 6 week training and she stayed there for 6 weeks. With she was she had an invitation from the National Association of Negro Musicians, and she had a scholarship. And she went. She was determined not to let anything get in the way of perfecting her artistry, and that's how determined and brave she was. And there was just so many darn things. Paul, I'll just tell you a little side story. As I started putting all this together, uh, I found out all this information. I said, "No, this can't be true. All this I'm finding can't be true. It has to be urban legend." So I called up my brother Jim, who had just retired as a homicide detective in the Philadelphia Police Force. And I said, "Jim, you're pretty good at investigating people, aren't you?" He said, "Yeah, I'm pretty good. I put a few people in jail for murder one." And he said, I said, "Well, how do you investigate somebody thoroughly to make sure I don't want to put anything out there in writing that isn't true?" And he said, "Well, what we do, we usually do a timeline, and if everything fits within the timeline pretty easily, if it fits, it's probably true. Just check it out." And so I did it, and everything, darn Paul, everything fit. I
Wow.
couldn't believe it.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
because she was around for 96 years, it took me a long time to put that timeline together.
for sure. Yeah, for sure. Let's talk. I know you're working on your second book now about Marian Anderson, and so what will be in the second book that you didn't necessarily cover in the first book? Because there are many books out there about
Yeah.
Marian Anderson, but what will be in the second book that we could expect?
Well, all the books, including my first book, were about her public onstage life and how the singer Marian Anderson. I'm not really focusing that much on that. I'm focusing on the Saint Marian Anderson, her private offstage life, and that has never been written about.
Hmm.
And it was very difficult to peel back that onion because she was so private and humble. I had to really do some deep digging. But you know what? It's all out there on the internet, Paul. It's all out there somewhere. Every time I think I have a wrap on it, I find something else and I have to start rewriting.
Yeah. That's the sign of a good writer and a good author because you're constantly searching and constantly researching and going back and triple checking everything that you're writing. Um, one thing is before she passed away at the age of 96, did she realize her accomplishments or her place in history? I mean, a lot of times, people are just so caught up in the moment and they only worry about the now. But when she was in her later years and before she passed away, did she realize not only her musical contributions but also her um, um, overall worldwide contributions?
Oh, she certainly did. She had her nephew was James DePriest, and James wrote the foreword in her autobiography, and he addressed that actually.
Hmm.
He Marion was never able to really talk about herself. She never wanted. It was never about her. And whenever she talked about her accomplishments, she'd always say we. Finally, somebody said, "What do you? Why do you always say we?" She said, "Because it was the Lord and me, and if it
Hmm.
wasn't for the Lord, we would not have been able to do that." And
Oh,
she never really, she never really gloated about her success or any of that, but she knew about it. But she always downplayed it, and she always wanted to talk about other things and other people than herself. She was never self-centered.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
When your first book, "Remembering a Great American Hero," Marian Anderson, is now available on places like Amazon, correct, Joe?
sure,
Okay.
absolutely,
And
absolutely.
I also want to mention your website, whywelovemarian.com. And Marian is Marian. Whywelovemarian.com. You can find more information out about the books. You can find out more information about Joe and all of his accomplishments and his work. When all is said and done, it's about time that somebody in Philadelphia has taken the bold step forward to document all her great contributions and her place, not only in Philadelphia, not only in America, but in the world, and that is so important. And anything that in the few minutes that we have left, Joe, anything that you personally can take away from the life of Marian Anderson?
Well, there's a lot of things I'm taking away, and that's why I'm writing this book from the spiritual side of her life. And it has to be told. It's a story that must be told to the future generations. And I'm working very hard on that. And the people see this book and when they look at the index and see the index chapter headings, they'll understand what I'm talking about. And they can go right to those sections if they don't feel like starting in the beginning. They go right to
Mhm.
those sections and find out everything they want about her that I was able to dig out. And I'm doing a lot of digging, man. I'm doing a
Yeah.
lot of digging.
I'm sure. I'm sure. And as you said, 96 years. There is a lot of information to
Right.
go through. Yeah, and most of it you found on the internet. I mean, it's a shame that she's still not around. That you could have sat down and talked to her and sort of get inside her mind and find out what was going on. But I'm sure there have been many interviews that maybe you're able to use in your research to sort of get inside the mind and the person that was Marian Anderson.
Well, it's not just the internet, but it's visiting the museum and her home museum at 762 South Martin Street in Philadelphia, and seeing what's there. And the lady who runs it, Jillian Pertell, is excellent. and she's dedicated her life to Marian Anderson, and just to learn from her. And she's a certified historian, by the way, so
Mhm.
she really knows her. She knows of quite a few things. I've learned a lot from her. I've learned a lot from. I've actually met people who knew her and talked with them, and I keep getting the same story. What a magnificent lady she was, and how inspirational she was. One person said that you could talk to her for 5 minutes, not even knowing who she was or that she was a great singer, and just feel inspired by her. She was
Wow.
so inspirational. And
Mm.
that's the type of person she was. And she was able to put that heart and soul into her music. And anybody who ever went to a Marian Anderson concert always remembered it, always remembered it. Yeah.
The again, the name of the book, and the book is available. It's Remembering a Great American Hero, Marian Anderson. Um, Joe, in the minute that we have left, any idea when that second book, and
Uh,
not to put the pressure on you now, but any idea when you're going to have that done?
well, Paul, last week I finished the first complete draft of the first draft of the manuscript. It's 22 chapters, plus a lot of front material and back material in the book. And but now the hard work begins because there's so many people who I've cited in this. I have to get a lot of permissions from them to put them in the book.
Sure.
And it's going to be published in April of 2026. It's
Okay.
scheduled for April 2026.
Great. Well, that is something that we'll look forward to, and we'll have to have you back on the show
I
to.
can I can I can give you the working title right now.
Sure. Okay.
The title is "The Power of Music for the Soul: Life Lessons from the Life and Triumphs of Marian Anderson." That's the subtitle.
Wow. That is a great subject. That is a
Yeah,
great title. It sort of sums up the essence of what the book is all about.
that's what I try to do. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Joe, I want to thank you for your time. You've been most gracious with your time. And again, remembering a great American hero, Marian Anderson. WhyWeLoveMarian.com is the website. And Joe, thank you so much for being with us here on the program. You are a great guest, a great Philadelphian, a great American. And again, thank you for your service. Thank you for everything you've done. And most importantly, bringing the life and times of Marian Anderson to our collective consciousness. And I want to thank you for that.
Thank you very much, Paul. It's a pleasure being with you.
Okay. We'll see you real soon, Joe. Thank you so much.
Okay.
And ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for being with us here on the Philly Factor. And we'll catch you next time around. Have a good one.